In this section, we're going to talk about some counting techniques that are a little more advanced, and we're going to deal with permutations and combinations. And I'm sure I won't get to combinations in this video, but we will get to at least mention the permutations. Before I get into the formulas for permutations and combinations involve something that's called factorial. So if you see a number like 5 with an exclamation point beside it, that actually is read 5 factorial. But what it means is that you multiply down until you get to 1. So if you have 5 factorial, then you multiply it times the number, one number less, and then 2 numbers less, 3 numbers less, and then finally you stop at when you get to 1. And so 5 factorial would be 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1, which is 120. Now the actual formula for n factorial says that you take the number n and you multiply it by n minus 1, then you multiply it by n minus 2, then you multiply it by n minus 3, and so forth until you get down to 1. So just like the 5 factorial, 4 factorial up there would be 4 times 1 less than 4, which is 3, and then multiply by 2 less than 4, which is 2. And then finally, once you get to 1, you stop there and then do the calculation. So 4 factorial would equal 24. 3 factorial would simply be 3 times 2 times 1, which is 6. 2 factorial is 2 times 1, which is 2. 1 factorial is just 1. Now the next thing I'm going to tell you is simply just because it makes the math work. 0 factorial might be a little bit disturbing to you to know that 0 factorial also equals 1, but just remember that's actually a true statement. 0 factorial is defined to be 1. Now you can calculate factorials by hand, and you can also calculate using a basic calculator using multiplications. But more advanced calculators will have a factorial button that will do all the work for you. And we'll talk more on that later. Now, we know how to calculate 5 factorial, 4 factorial, and so on by hand, but you might not want to calculate 15 factorial by hand. So you could enter into your calculator. You might not want to do this, 15 times 14 times 13 all the way down to 1. But once we get to the calculator, once I talk about the calculator, you'll see you can actually calculate factorials with a button on your calculator. But let's say we don't have a calculator now and we need some tricks. So let me show you a couple of tricks you can do. Let's say if you had to calculate a quotient like 10 factorial divided by 9 factorial. Well, it turns out that I see this 9 factorial down here. You can actually write 10 factorial as 10 times 9 factorial. And let me show you why. See, 10 factorial is, 10 times 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. But the 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is just 9 factorial. So I can write 10 factorial as 10 times this, which is 9 factorial. And then when I write it like that, 10 times 9 factorial, I can actually cancel the 9 factorial over 9 factorial because that equals 1. And then I just get the number 10. You can actually go even a little bit further depending on what the number is in the denominator. Here, since I have 7 factorial in the denominator, I'm going to write 10 factorial as 10 times 9 times 8 times 7 factorial. And then that way I can cancel the 7 factorials, and then all I have to do is calculate 10 times 9 times 8, which is 720. Now, warning here, when you have something like 3 factorial times 4 factorial, you don't multiply first. You have to do the factorials first. So that would not equal 12 factorial. It would actually equal, you'd have to calculate 3 factorial, which is 6, then calculate 4 factorial, which is 24, and then multiply them together to get the result. And the same thing with a division. Here, you would have to calculate the 4 factorial first, then calculate the 2 factorial in the denominator, and you would get 24 over 2, which is 12. So as I said, if you'll just go to YouTube, you can actually locate for calculating calculating factorials on the calculator, and let me show you that. I'll just show you how to do it. So you'll notice here I put in the search dialog box here calculating factorials using the TI-84, and so if I hit enter, then you'll see there's several tutorials here on how to use your calculator to find factorials. So it's pretty simple. Just pick one of these videos and then just follow along, and you can see how to calculate factorials on your TI calculator. Now if you don't have a TI-84, just put in whatever calculator you have right there in order to find the appropriate video for you. I'm going to finish this video here with just a simple factorial problem. And a factorial is actually a multiplication principle where you use all of the objects. In the previous section we asked how many three-letter code words you could create from the first 9 letters of the alphabet without repetition. What if I change it to how many 9-letter code words? How many 9-letter code words, let me emphasize that, how many 9-letter code words you could create from the 9 letters without repetition. Well then, since we're using all 9 letters, then you have 9 choices for the first letter, 8 choices for the second letter, 7 choices for the third letter, and so on. So if you multiply that together, that would give you 9 for the first letter, 8 for the second letter, 7 for the third letter, 6 choices for the fourth letter, 5 choices for the fifth letter, 4 choices for the sixth letter, 3 for the seventh letter, 2 choices for the eighth letter, and then leaves you with 1 choice for the last letter. Well, this part right here, as you can see, is just the multiplication principle that we talked about earlier, but actually it turns out that that multiplication principle is simply a factorial. That's the same as 9 factorial. Here's another example. Suppose 8 different amino acids must line up perfectly in a certain order for a bodily function to work properly. How many ways could these amino acids line up? Well, since there are different amino acids, we're not going to have repetition. So there are 8 ways. There's 8 acids that could be in the first slot. Then there's 7 acids left for the second slot, 6 acids left for the next slot, 5 for the next slot, 4 for the next slot, 3 for the next slot, 2 for the next slot, and then 1 for the last slot, which is really just 8 times 7 times 6 times 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1, which is 8 factorial. Now I didn't calculate these for you, but now that you know how to do them on a calculator, you can actually get the actual numbers that these factorials will equal on your own. So in the next section, I'm going to introduce you to the concept of permutations.